Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about food sovereignty in Missouri. And with me I have Kathleen Logan Smith, who is a food activist. Now, Kathleen Logan Smith, tell me, what in the world does food sovereignty mean? I mean, you and I use that phrase a lot, but I bet you a lot of people looking at this show think, what are these people talking about?
You know, it's interesting as people have an idea that they don't understand what the words mean. But when you talk about, you ask the question, can you feed yourself? Can America feed itself? That gets to the heart of food sovereignty. It's sort of the right and the responsibility, frankly, of a nation and a people and a region to be able to grow their own food to feed their own people.
So what does that have to do with freedom?
It has everything to do with freedom, because if transnational corporations are coming in and telling you that you can't grow food, that you have to grow what they want, which often isn't food, or isn't food for you to eat, then you can't feed yourself anymore. And if you can't feed your people, you become a corporate slave. And that's what's happening across the world. Farmland is being taken by corporations, and farmers are being left unable to feed themselves. And farming communities are unable to feed themselves. And even in America, farmers don't eat what they grow.
I know that a century or 2 centuries ago that people used to grow at least 20 different crops, so that if one crop failed or 2 crops failed, you would have all these other crops that you could grow. And now, I mean, when you're talking about, you know, how you could starve, if you grow just one crop, all you grow is wheat or all you grow is soy, even though you may grow a whole lot of food that people eat, it's kind of hard for one farmer to survive on purely soy or purely wheat.
Or if you're growing a whole lot of soy or a whole lot of corn, you may be growing ethanol, or you may be growing paint thinner, or you may be growing ink, or you may be growing plastics, because there's a lot of industrial products that come from corn and soy. So a lot of the cropland we see here in this region is dedicated to industrial crops that are dedicated for either feeding livestock or for the industrial chemical market.
Well, okay, this gets to how much food is actually grown of the food that we eat. Now, we see fields everywhere in the United States, so would it be accurate to say that the overwhelming amount of food that Americans eat is actually grown in the U.S.?
I think it might be fair to say that, but you can bet it's not grown within 300 miles of you.
Okay.
So most of what we're eating in this region comes from California and Florida and Arizona and the Central Valley of California. It's irrigated with water taken from as far away as Colorado. And in the case of Florida, you know, it's trucked thousands of miles. So most of the food that's in everyone's house right now, this very second, is food that traveled over 1,000 miles to get there. And it's often not fresh. It's often been bred for shelf stability or for how long it can survive in a box. It's often been ripened chemically. It wasn't ripened in the field, if you're talking about produce and that kind of stuff. So by the time it gets to your table, it's lost a lot of nutritional value, if it had any to start with. And it's more of a commodity than it is something that's delicious and fresh and good for you.
And so this means that Missouri, the majority of the food that we eat in Missouri is not really from Missouri, even though it could be.
About 90% of it is not from
Missouri. About 90% of Missouri's food from Missouri is imported, right. And most of that is from far away, like Florida or California.
Well, and you can just read the labels. I mean, if people read the labels in their pantry, they will see where their food, and they won't see where it all comes from, because there's a lot of sneaky things that happen in the food system. You know, when you buy garlic at the grocery store, even if you buy whole garlic, almost all the garlic in America is coming from China. There is no reason for that, because garlic is easy to grow. It's a great winter crop.
And there's garlic farmers right outside St. Louis, aren't there?
There's garlic farmers all over the place, and Slow Food St. Louis has a huge garlic growing project in the region to help relocalize the garlic crop. And so there's a lot of things like that where people can pay attention to just a few crops that should be growing local, and garlic is one of those. And you could do that by growing your own. It's a lot cheaper than buying it even.
Well, you mentioned the phrase slow food. What I've heard that before, but how would you describe it?
So slow food is the opposite of fast food. Okay, fast food is something that came from a drive-through. It came from an industrial supplier. It's got chemicals in it. It's from factory farms, and then by the time it gets to you, it's been processed 6 ways to Sunday. And so slow food is food like your grandmother or great-grandmother used to make, where she took a whole pumpkin and then made a pumpkin pie, where she took a whole chicken and made chicken and dumplings, where, if they made hamburgers, they did them at home and they crafted them by hand and cooked them by hand. So it's taking whole food ingredients and making fresh, whole food to eat, but it's not fast food. And Slow Food International is an organization dedicated to promoting food heritage, food traditions, and slow food. Healthy, good, clean, fair food.
Okay. Now, I'm sure that most people thinking about this think, well, this is because farmers just made bad decisions. What's wrong with these farmers to make decisions? But you've told me that bankers have a lot to do with it. What does the banking system and bankers have to do with the way that food is grown and used today?
So that's the challenge right now. We started letting the accountants farm or make farm decisions instead of farmers. And we went wrong about 70 years ago. And we got into a trap of mechanizing and monoculture and creating industrialized crops, which basically violates a lot of the rules of nature. Instead of having lots of local choices now in terms of where our food comes from, if you go to the grocery store, you'll have very few. If you go to one of the big grocery store chains and you're buying bacon, for example, you'll see 5 or 10 different labels on that bacon, and almost all of it's from the same company, from the same factory farm, owned by China and farming in Missouri.
And so when there's recalls of things, that's why there's recalls from so many. They
just brand it 10 different ways. And so a lot of the things that are marketed as choices are false choices. When you go find out the actual place where that pig was raised that is in that bacon, you'll discover that it's from a Chinese-owned factory farm, and it's labeled several different ways in the grocery store. But you will not have, if you go to the grocery store chains, the odds that you'll have a choice of buying from a local farmer are really, really slim. So the only way you can do that is to pay attention to your farmers' markets and go meet your farmers.
Okay, let me tell you this. We're about to see a portion of a film, Greening the Revolution, and a segment about economics and global economics. Could you tell the viewer a little bit about what we're going to see?
So this is a really simple explanation of what can be a complicated issue. But what it comes down to, and you can talk to truck drivers, you can talk to people sweeping up offices, you can talk to people on the street. It's really, the economists try to make it complicated. The truth is, it's corporations trying to make the most money at the least cost, exploiting as many countries and resources and nations as they possibly can to do it with no rules or regulations. I mean, that's really what it is about. It's about them getting as much as they can at whatever expense to the rest of us. And so that kind of greed is really not unfamiliar to people. It's just this little clip will explain the institutions that nurture that greed, that foster that greed, and that wield that greed around the planet to the detriment of people and food sovereignty, because now nations that used to feed themselves, including ours, can't do it. And that's something for us to pay attention to.
Okay. We're going to see now just a short clip from Greening the Revolution.
Today's food system is global. The same meal can be grown in Africa, packaged in Asia, and eaten in North America. But because food isn't free, it's controlled by economics. The economic system that runs today's world is based on capitalism, also known as economic globalization, global corporate capitalism, and neoliberalism. Capitalism mostly makes money off of human labor, but it also profits through the private ownership of land and resources like water and seeds. The economic globalization of food can be viewed in 3 parts: governments, institutions, and corporations. There are over 190 countries in the world, each with their own government, that makes decisions about who has land to farm, what food to export and import, and how to spend public money, like on education or healthcare. Governments can also create trade deals such as NAFTA, which privatize Mexico's public farmland. Governments are influenced by the corporate interests of their own country, but there are outside forces too. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund, or IMF, are global financial institutions that work together to loan money to different countries. But when a country borrows money from the World Bank, the IMF has rules the country must follow, such as 1. Cut funding for public education and healthcare. 2. Buy a certain amount of food from other countries even if the borrowing country already grows enough food. 3. Stop or decrease all subsidy money given to farmers to help them compete in the global market. But this rule does not apply to the United States.
Let's say it costs $2 for both a small farmer in Haiti and the Cargill Corporation in America to grow a pound of corn. The U.S. government could give Cargill $1 for each pound of corn.
But the Haitian farmer can't get any government money. The U.S. corporation can then sell its pound of corn for $2 and make a $1 profit. But because the Haitian farmer doesn't get any subsidies, she has to sell her corn for $3 to make the same $1 profit. Most people have to buy whatever food is cheapest, so the majority buy the corporation's cheaper, subsidized corn. But the Haitian farmer can't compete and goes broke. 4. The borrowing country must lower wage controls and stop environmental regulations. Companies can then pay workers barely enough to survive and ignore environmental destruction that affects farming, like deforestation and soil erosion. 5. Another IMF rule: make public lands private. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, is another global institution. It mainly acts as a court to rule on disagreements between countries about trade. Its decisions and proceedings are usually secret and not disclosed to the public or media. No one is elected to the WTO or the IMF or the World Bank, so the public has no say in their actions. The third part of this international economic system is the corporation. Because selling food is a way to make money, corporations try to make the most money they can, even if it means that people will starve. Often assisted by the global institutions and governments, the food industry can roam the world in search of the cheapest labor, land, and resources in order to make the biggest possible profit.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz, and we are talking about food sovereignty in Missouri. And with me I have Logan Smith, who is a food activist. Kat, we just saw a clip about economics, and it had an interesting statement about food in Haiti in the United States. Could you review just for a second what that meant?
Well, what's interesting about that, I think that'll stand out for everyone, is this idea, because we like to play on the level playing field. We like fairness in our the way we're treated in business and otherwise. And the fact that the United States helps make these rules for other countries, poor countries, third world countries, for example, and then they don't have to follow the rules. That stood out to me, and it stood out to me that a corporation like Cargill, which is one of the most powerful and wealthy privately held corporations on the planet, could undercut farm workers, and farmers in Haiti. Like, what does that tell you about the way the system is rigged? By
basically getting kickbacks from the government for
because the U.S. can support its farmers, but Haiti can't support its farmers, and this is where the idea.
So it's not an actual rule. It's just that it doesn't prohibit the U.S. from supporting farmers, and so consequently, when they get government subsidies, that's what allows U.S. farmers to undercut Haitian farmers.
Because it's illegal for Haiti to give subsidies to its farmers.
Oh, it is illegal.
And so it will be punished. If Haiti does it, they get punished. If America does it, they do not. So this is the problem, is that, and in every case, it undermines food sovereignty, because now Haitian farmers can't feed themselves or their own people because now Haiti's buying American grain. Well, that doesn't make any sense. If they can grow their own, they should be as independent as possible. It doesn't make any sense, for us to buy pigs from China, I mean, we can grow pigs just fine here, and we could grow them with American-owned companies here just fine.
What do you think would be a better characterization of the world food market now? Free trade? Is it free trade or is it fair trade?
It's neither. It's neither free, because it's costing us a lot in terms of our health and our resources, our democracy and our sovereignty and our freedom, and it isn't fair at all, because it's rigged by the big banks and the corporations that own the big banks, and that's the bottom line. I mean, you don't have to look very deep to find that data.
One thing that I've noticed, there's been a lot of discussions ever since NAFTA passed in 1994, but for over 20 years there's been a lot of discussion about trade that I didn't hear before. And one of the things that I find people don't want to talk about very much is that fair trade might mean a lot less trade, which flows directly from what you're saying. If Haiti's going to be self-sufficient and America's going to be self-sufficient, what's the need? I mean, the trade used to be countries would have comparative advantage. The United States might be able to produce better steel, and Haiti might be able to produce, better something else, but like better coconuts or things from a tropical island. But if you're trading just so you can make money, that's not,
That's what we call a transactional wealth. It's a paper economy, and it's not grounded in the land or the people or the traditions or the blood or the sweat or the tears or anything else that happens. But so it's interesting to pay attention to things like that, because when we passed NAFTA, Mexico used to export food. Now they export labor. Okay, so the reason the Mexicans are coming across the border and certain people want to build a wall is because because they collapsed the agricultural economy in Mexico, and now people are looking for work. And NAFTA and the trading agreements did that, and we have some more trade agreements on tap for this. And they collapsed the farm economies there. The peasants didn't have any more work. They couldn't work. They didn't have anything to do.
And this is because of the price of corn falling.
Because the price of corn wouldn't support a farm, and so they're coming to America to work here. So they used to export food from Mexico, which makes great sense because they're growing great things south of here, during when it's colder up here. So it would make sense from a trade perspective, if you were interested in fair business and fair trade, to have a relationship with Mexico. But now that we've gone to this exploitive trade situation, now they're not exporting food from Mexico anymore in the same degree. Now they're exporting labor, and they're exporting cheap labor to America, and it is costing all of us, frankly, because those workers get seriously exploited in this country.
And so it's the comparative advantage you'll be talking about with Mexico is that Mexico can, because it's a more tropical economy, has a longer growing season and could grow fruits and vegetables.
Their blackberries come on months before ours, yeah.
Right. In others, sooner after winter and longer, after summer, they could be. There's a much shorter winter, and that would be the comparative advantage of Mexico. But there's no longer. That's not what's happening now.
What's happening now is, if people want to talk about building a wall, they should really be looking at the corporations that are benefiting from all that labor, and a lot of those corporations are in agriculture. A lot of the slaughterhouses wouldn't be operating without immigrant labor, and a lot of the crops wouldn't be picked without immigrant labor. I mean, the truth is, the tomatoes, the watermelons, the peaches, the apples would not be coming off the trees if it wasn't for the immigrant labor, because Americans aren't lining up to do that work.
Yeah, well, you've actually covered two reasons why a wall is not going to have the effects that were promised that it would have. One reason that people know about is that what you just mentioned, that we need the immigrant labor. And the other is no wall is going to stop the price of corn from falling in Mexico. And as long as the price of corn means there's no work in Mexico, then that's going to keep happening. Okay, we're going to need to take a break now, and we're going to see another clip from Greening the Revolution that has to do exactly with this issue of immigrant workers coming from Mexico to the United States.
Aprendimos a quererte desde Realmente yo fui el primero de mi familia que salió de mi pueblo para venir a Estados Unidos. Y eso fue debido a las políticas implementadas por este país, por Estados Unidos. Después de NAFTA, México no exporta más granos, pero sigue exportando México ahora. Pero ahora sigue exportando solamente mano de obra barata para los Estados Unidos.
Cuando antes la coalición no estaba funcionando, o sea que la coalición no existía, un día golpearon a un trabajador por ir a tomar agua. La coalición se empezó a formar.
La coalición la empezamos básicamente un grupo como de 8 personas. Éramos una mezcla de lo que es la comunidad de Immokalee, haitianos, mexicanos y guatemaltecos. Y por eso es que fuimos nosotros mismos, los trabajadores, que decidimos organizarnos. Fue cuando se hizo una huelga de hambre por 6 compañeros de 30 días, y eso fue lo que trajo más atención hacia el problema de Immokalee, de los trabajadores, y trajimos más apoyo también de gente de afuera.
The Student Farm Worker Alliance is a national network of students and youth organizing in solidarity with the farm workers of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. I think that our model is good because we don't assume that we know everything. We take our leadership from the group that is leading this movement. One of our major successes was during the 4-year Taco Bell boycott. Over 300 universities were involved, over 50 high schools, and we were successful in removing 25 Taco Bell restaurants or preventing them from opening.
The CIW has a really extensive anti-slavery campaign, and it does this through many ways. One of them is through education, and another thing that the coalition does is a lot of victim assistance.
Hasta el día de hoy seguimos teniendo reuniones cada miércoles con la comunidad ahora aquí en el nuevo centro.
De esta manera, con estos volantes vamos haciendo las juntas comunitarias, vamos invitando a toda la comunidad a que participe, a saber acerca de la campaña, acerca de nuestros derechos, acerca de todo lo que venimos realizando con la comunidad.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm Don Fitz, host. We are talking about food sovereignty in Missouri. And with me again, I have Logan Smith, who is a food activist. Now, you were telling me that there is something called the Food Shed Study, which was done locally. Is that correct?
Right. So
tell us about it. What happened?
So if you draw a circle around St. Louis for 100 miles and look at what we grow and what we eat, that's what we did. We looked at what we grow and what we eat and what we spend. And you can find this study on the Missouri Coalition for the Environment website. And in this 100-mile circle, we discovered we have 9 million crop acres, official crop acres. That's not what's in your backyard, but that's official crop acres. 8 million growing corn and soybeans. 8 million of those crop acres growing corn and soybeans
That's
for
a little bit of concentration there.
Industrial markets. And but 90% of what we're eating is imported, okay? And if you look at what we're spending, you spend money on food, right? Everybody spends money on food. Either they're going to the drive-thru or the grocery store or whatever, but they're spending some kind of money on food.
Even with a backyard garden like I have to spend money on
Even
food.
if they're swiping their SNAP card, somebody's spending money on the food. We spend $16 or so billion in this region every year on food. $16 billion. And 90% of what we're buying is from outside of the region. And it doesn't have to be.
Okay, so
that's the bottom line.
Missouri could have a lot more food sovereignty. We could eat food that's grown locally.
We could keep $15 billion at least in the region. And how many families would that support, Don? How many families?
Kathleen, Logan Smith, I'm getting the wrap-up sign. I want to say thank you very much for participating in this discussion of Green Time. I want to thank the viewers for tuning into Green Time, and be sure to look at us the same time next week.